So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. And I hope everyone enjoyed lunch. Sorry, we did have to cut that a little bit short, but I hope everyone had a nice lunch break anyway. So we're moving on to the last two sessions of this year's conference, and we normally do like to try and keep some of the more contentious and hopefully what are going to be more the more lively discussions to the final afternoon, just to make sure we will have something to keep us all awake after a long 2 days. So we've done that this year as well. So the next two sessions are going to be focusing on the UHF band and then on the 3.5 gigahertz C band. So really looking forward to both these discussions. So we're going to start off with the focus on UHF and the sub-1 gigahertz frequency. And once again, have an excellent line of panelists here. So to tell you more and to introduce the panelists and the issues, I'd like to now pass over to Mark Colville for Analysis Mason, who's our moderator. Mark, welcome. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dan, and thanks to Forum Global more generally for the invite. And I'm happy to be here presenting this, or moderating this panel on the future of the UHF. For those of you who've not met, as Dan said, my name is Mark Colville. I'm from Analysis Mason. We're a global consultancy focused on the telecoms, media, and technology sectors, and spectrum management, including spectrum valuation and spectrum auctions are some of our specialisms, and mine in particular. I've been asked to run through a brief overview of some of the issues to set the scene a little bit before I introduce and we hear from each of our panelists in turn, and then we'll open up for a Q&A. So I think this topic is a very important one, as has been highlighted by the fact that it's been mentioned already in passing, at least as part of most of the other sessions so far this week. And I'd like to start, therefore, by reiterating a point that's already been made several times, which is that sub-1 gigahertz spectrum is of significant value for providing mobile services, which is largely due to its excellent propagation characteristics. When we talk about sub-1 gigahertz, we're thinking in region 1 at least about the 900 megahertz band, which has been a mobile band for many years, and more recently the 800 and 700 megahertz bands, which are in the process of being repurposed from broadcasting and other uses to IMT. In sub-Saharan Africa, we've seen that there's been quite a lot of progress in licensing the 800 megahertz band to mobile operators, but as the map shows, there's still clearly more to do. And the 700 megahertz is, although well started, lagging a little bit behind the 800. So there's quite a few countries here where the assignments have not yet been made. And as we heard this morning from Johan, even where there has been an assignment, there's still in some cases some uncertainty over the time frame for usage, for example, in the 700 megahertz band, where digital switchover is still to conclude. So it might be tempting to think that whilst 800 and 700 megahertz licensing has not been completed in many countries, that the focus in sub-Saharan Africa, at least in terms of the UHF, should be on licensing those bands. And I think that's true to an extent. But it's also worth noting that there are, of course, several countries in sub-Saharan Africa where both bands have already been licensed for quite a period of time. And just to take an example from the South African auction, and I'll give a caveat about these numbers, which are illustrative in a moment. What we can see here is that the prices paid in that auction for 700 megahertz and 800 megahertz spectrum were significantly above the reserve prices. So around 2 times in the 800 case and getting on for 3 times above reserve in the 700 case. And what that indicates, at least to me, is that there's significant excess demand and hence value lying in the potential of more sub-1 gigahertz spectrum for mobile use. And I think that extends beyond the 800 megahertz lot, which didn't sell for coverage obligation reasons. So it's important that we start thinking about what might be relevant in terms of the sub-700 megahertz. The caveat I mentioned is these numbers are illustrative. ICASA has not published, to my knowledge at least, the band-by-band breakdown, but given the auction format and outcome, it's fairly straightforward to apply a linear decomposition and work out roughly what the prices paid in each band were, which I think is enough detail for our purposes here to make the point. So, as has been discussed already, agenda item 1.5 for WRC23 concerns 470 to 960 megahertz in region 1. And in Europe, at least, DTT and PMSE hold a significant level of importance, and there's a commitment there to continue to use sub-700 megahertz spectrum for those purposes until at least 2030, although there are starting to be questions asked of what happens beyond that. By contrast, in the Middle East, where DTT is much less heavily relied upon, there's already a push to start using spectrum in that zone for mobile services, and the 600 megahertz band, or 3GPP band 71 or N71, has come into focus. And this is a band that's actually already in use in the US and Canada and a few other countries, and is being considered quite strongly in other parts of the Americas and Asia, including, I think, being part of the Indian auction recently, although it didn't sell for reasons of high reserve prices. And what do we mean by that band on my final slide here? Well, it's a 2 times 35 megahertz FDD band, and it slots in nicely below the 700 megahertz band as already used in region 1. So there's the potential for use in this region, and there's a potential for quite significant value due to the level of harmonization that could be associated with the band. But as I alluded to on the last slide, there might well be conflicting views here across region 1 on the best way to handle the UHF in the long term, and to think about what the purpose of 700 megahertz should be. In Europe, for example, we've talked for quite a while about this salami slicing of the UHF band, so slicing off chunks progressively from the spectrum being used by broadcast and PMSE, and the fact that that leads to some problems. Firstly, as you chip away at the broadcast spectrum, you make DTT progressively less viable in comparison to other modes of television delivery. And secondly, there is a question in the mobile context of how useful another small chunk of spectrum at sub-1 gigahertz actually is in the context of the mobile world generally moving towards high capacity delivered via large carriers in the 3.5 gigahertz band, for example. So I think there is still a lot of value here, but it's not perhaps the way that, in the same way that sub-1 gigahertz has been thought about in the past. And moreover, this isn't just about mobile and broadcasting. As I've mentioned, there's PMSE to consider, and in Africa as well. Another issue is thinking about TV white space use and whether that could be a possibility for helping with rural broadband solutions. So whilst harmonization in the 600 megahertz is an attractive proposition, it's certainly not the only long-term solution for the band here. Others that I can think of would include continuing to use the whole of the sub-700 range, that is 470 to 694, for its current purpose of broadcast and PMSE and white space services. Second, you could go completely the other way, and you could think about a solution in which that whole range was used to provide a TDD band for mobile, which would offer perhaps the greatest benefits to mobile through allowing large contiguous carriers that could offer significant data capacity. But to my mind, perhaps most interestingly, we need to think about whether there are hybrid or sharing approaches that could be used here. For example, using supplementary downlink, which avoids the uplink interference issues with mobile, to think about an approach that could offer some mobile broadband service alongside, say, 5G broadcast. So there's no easy solutions here, but it's an important decision to get right as we think about trying to maximize the value of UHF over not just the next few years, but in the long term. So with that, I'll stop talking and I'll introduce the first of our panelists, who I'm delighted to say is Ronelle Lagrange, who's the head of electronic communications at the Namibian regulator, the Communications Regulatory Authority of Namibia, and someone who I have fond memories of working personally with on the first Namibian auction a few years ago. Ronelle, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Yeah, we are the session after lunch, so I don't know if I should do a dance routine or throw the cat among the pigeons when I start presenting, but I will give it my best attempt. As you know, and I was pleased to see it on the very first day that agenda item 1.5 was listed as one of the most important items of WRC 23. And I think it's also because we had such long discussions on that agenda point. So with not much to do, I represent the Namibia Communications Regulator of Namibia, CRAN. We are one of the independent regulators in Africa, which means I do not assign spectrum for the sake of assigning spectrum. I do it with a specific impact in mind, and I also do it at cost-based pricing. So pricing and what the value of the spectrum market-wise is not the most important part. It is the use of the spectrum. So if we look at what we have in the 470 to 960 band, and specifically is there's a lot of disparities in the utilization of these bands in the world, especially region 1. Even it differs from country to country. the success of the services deployed, whether it is IMT mobile broadband or whether it is DTT, still differs between country to country. And secondly is, of course, we have to look at the continuation of terrestrial broadcasting services because investments has been made and there is customers making use of the service. Further than that, if there's a need for more sub-gigahertz spectrum for telecommunications, especially for rural connectivity. But I think the main question, and I think that is what all of us are missing, is what the consumer want. Do the consumer are interested in receiving the broadcasting services via the traditional broadcasting method, or have the consumer moved to instant gratification and prefer streaming services and other means of obtaining the content that they would like to see, whether by mobile phone or by satellite or by other means? And can we serve the consumer with the broadband spectrum available in sub-1 GHz for broadband services? Or do we need more? And I think that is the main question at heart. Now, if you look at the case of Namibia, the DTT plan spans over both the 174 to 230 megahertz as well as 470 to 694. We adhered to the switchover deadline of ITU of 17 June 2015. However, the public broadcaster opted to have most of its sites in the band 174 to 230 because it could obtain larger coverage area. Now, if we look at the utilization 8 years later, it begs to decide whether DTT was a success. Did it really deliver on the promise of DTT? We planned 4 layers, 63 sites each. At present, the public broadcast has implemented 42 sites. Only 34 is in use. They only use 1 multiplexer with 3 channels. The commercial broadcaster, and I won't name names, have asked for spectrum in 2 multiplexers, but they only rolled out 5 sites. And then they all switched to satellite because it's simply too expensive to roll out terrestrial television in Namibia with a very sparse population. It's not that they do not intend to provide broadcasting services, it's the method to deliver those broadcasting services in a sustainable manner that sits at the heart of the decision. That means, and I've got no utilization of the 4th multiplexer. So in large, the band is unutilized. And as was pointed out by many speakers, spectrum doesn't have a value if it remains unutilized. This is also the case in some other countries. We are not the only country with this situation. So what do we have to do is, currently with us, 900 megs is fully assigned and it's optimally used for 2G and 3G. Namibia intends to switch off 2G by 2024 because it doesn't make broadband standards. Also, we have already an 85% population coverage with 4G, for which the 700 and 800 bands is fully licensed by 2023 first quarter, and rollout is under rollout obligations, which means the licensee enforce rollout. We don't have a USF, we never have, but yet we have obtained our population targets because of rollout obligations. That means going forward, we anticipate that we will need more spectrum below 1 gigahertz, as we will not be able to fulfill the future broadband requirements, while broadcasting will be served by satellite in large in Namibia, and also because of changing consumer behavior, especially the youth. They want instant gratification. They access content on their cell phone. They stream what they want to see, at what time they want to see it, and when they want to see it, not according to a program schedule. But we are cognizant that especially the public broadcast have a task to provide information, and for that they also need broadcasting. So it's not a question for us to take the whole band, but we do see an opportunity in the upper band and leaving the lower band plus the 174 to 230 for broadcasting and the auxiliary services to broadcasting to continue broadcasting services in Namibia. The question will be, and the question to this room is, how many other countries are in the same situation? And how many countries have a different situation in Region 1? And should we allow for future development by assigning the spectrum now, or consider assignment of the spectrum now? Assigning spectrum doesn't mean you are using it tomorrow. There's a lot of planning that goes into it. But somewhere, 4 years, 3 years down the line, we may need the spectrum. But there may not be another opportunity to assign that spectrum or allocate it, as it will be no longer an agenda point. The world has moved on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ronelle. A lot of interesting points, some of which I'm sure we'll return to in the panel. Next, though, I'd like to introduce Scott McKenzie, a man I've known for many years, a director at Colliago Consulting. Over to you, Scott.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. Thank you very much, distinguished panel and the audience. I'm going to quickly go through. I've got quite a few slides, but I promise I'll make this fast. I'm going to talk quickly, but I'm conscious of the fact that we're the only thing between you and your weekend. So I'll make this relatively quick. Colliago Consulting, for those of you who don't know us, we're a specialist TMT consultancy, and we do a lot of work in spectrum. So that's the introduction over. Looking at sub-1 GHz spectrum, this is based on a recent report that we produced with the GSMA, and I just want to share some thoughts on sub-1 GHz spectrum, particularly from the sort of mobile industry perspective. In the original standards for 5G, there were originally two sets of frequency bands that were defined for 5G. There was FR1, frequency range 1, which is the sub-1 GHz and the mid-band spectrum up to 6 GHz. And then there was FR2, the frequency range 2, which covered all the millimeter wave spectrum above 26 GHz. So it was always foreseen that 5G would use a range of different frequencies in order to be able to provide 5G applications and deliver the sort of benefits of 5G. What mobile operators have seen, though, is that as they look at the traffic growth on their network, even in LTE, and as we move towards 5G in many markets, they're seeing very, very strong traffic growth. 30 to 40% per annum traffic growth is not uncommon in the mobile industry. And actually, the current sub-1 GHz allocations they have at 700, 800, 900, these are actually carrying a disproportionate amount of traffic relative to the capacity these bands offer. And quite a number of mobile operators we approached in this study told us that they are actually expecting, not now, maybe not in the next 2 years, but certainly in the next 5 years or so, that they're going to see a crunch in terms of capacity in the sub-1 GHz band. I think that feeds into what Ronald was saying earlier. At the same time, user experiences, the user expectations, should I say, are continuing to increase. So users want faster speeds, they want better coverage, and they want all of this for the same price. So that is a significant issue that the industry is obviously investing a lot of money to try and meet. And like every industry, they just want to serve their customers well. And if we were to look at allocating more sub-1 GHz spectrum in many locations at the cell edge, for example, at the edge of the network, you might only have access to the sub-1 gigahertz spectrum in buildings or in rural areas. If we were to allocate additional 600 megahertz spectrum on an FDD basis, that could offer higher speeds. Anything up to a 30% increase in the downlink speed could be possible. And what we also see that if additional low band spectrum, 600 megahertz, were to be allocated to mobile, that will also improve the economics of mobile coverage, because you won't need as many sites to cover a given area. And in fact, with 600 megahertz, if you had a 2x10 additional allocation, that would effectively, mean you would need 21% fewer cell sites. And if you got 2x20, then potentially a 33% reduction in the cell sites. And all of this means that, of course, you can cover rural areas more effectively. That's obviously a big issue in large countries or a huge continent like Africa. Rural coverage is, as we've heard over the last day or so, is a massive issue, and covering major highways, for example, very important. Covering so far, mobile networks don't cover very much in terms of countryside, and one of the benefits of 5G that's been talked about, but so far we have not seen anything of, is covering these areas and be able to use smart agriculture. So drones and sensors, for example, that is something that could potentially be enabled with cheaper and wider coverage. It'll also enable better coverage in hard to reach urban areas. So it's not just in-building coverage, it's also hard to cover outdoor areas also. So I'll just go very quickly through these. And clearly, rural coverage is a very, very big issue in meeting the needs of broadband services in rural areas. And I'd say there's one other big issue, obviously, and that is the power network as well. The regulators need to be thinking about that also, because clearly that is a massive issue if we're going to bring broadband to very remote areas. And there are other solutions here, not least satellite can be very cost effective. So I'm not saying mobile is the exclusive solution for this, it's not at all. We also, if additional spectrum were to be allocated, it potentially would make defragmenting the sub-1 gigahertz bands more feasible. This is something that, if you look at most countries now, they have highly fragmented bands below a gigahertz, and this is something that could be, this would increase efficiency and also increase capacity as well. So, in summary, in our report which was published by the GSMA, and you can find on the conference website, we identified something like 9 potential benefits of additional sub-1 gigahertz spectrum being allocated. I haven't obviously gone through all of them, given that I've only got a few minutes here to speak, but I'll let you read about them in the report if you're interested. And as Mark mentioned earlier, there is already a move towards 600 megahertz allocation for IMT. Obviously, the US and Canada have both allocated the N71 band, and other countries in the Americas, the Middle East, and in India are also looking at this as well. However, there's significant challenges. I'm involved in a project at the moment looking at this in a European country, and clearly there are, aside from the broadcast users, the other big issue is PMSE, program making and special events. I think one of the other speakers is going to talk about this in a minute, I'm sure. But clearly we'll have to come up with creative solutions, perhaps geo sharing, time sharing, if we want to want to also be able to accommodate these other user groups, so who are clearly very important as well. So that's it, really. I'd like to hand over now to the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, Scott.
Sorry.
And as you alluded to, we're next going to have a PMSE perspective here from Nada Abdulhafiz, who's the head of Spectrum and Regulatory Affairs for the MEA region at Shure, but is, I believe, speaking here today on behalf of the Association of Professional Wireless Production Technologies.
Thank you so much. Just how does that?
Just press the right one.
This one. Okay. Hello, everyone. Nada Abdulhafiz. I'm from Shure, and I'll be speaking on behalf of APWPT today, on behalf of the PMSC industry as well. So quickly, to introduce you to APWPT, it's the Association of Professional Wireless Production Technologies, and we're an international organization that we take care of our members who are part of the users and wireless technology production equipment providers. We have different ways that we're working in. We basically support the members. We try to put in more contributions and research. We work with the different audio industry manufacturers. So speaking to lots of you today, I realized that not many people are aware of the term PMSE and what it really stands for. So according to the ITU, PMSE is the short for Program Making and Special Events. It's an inclusive term that covers wireless microphones, in-ear monitoring systems, talkback systems, and it has also two other well-known names, known as SAP and SAP, which is Service Ancillary to Broadcasting, and Service Ancillary to Program Making. Now, PMSE is very well integrated into different industries, starting from broadcast, film, conference, the conference systems that we're all using here right now, education systems. And there's a huge demand and growing need, plus exceeding or increasing user expectations. So people expect their mic to work seamlessly, and I think we're lucky this past 2 days in the conference that we don't have any issues. And we need to, as the audio industry, to support and ensure that we have equipment that's running seamlessly. And today, it is virtually impossible to create content without PMSE. So PMSE is a key enabler in content production that is later consumed in across different platforms, like the streaming platforms, broadcasting, films, live events, and so on. One interesting use case that we like to share, which was the global event, the Expo at Dubai. So at the opening ceremony, there was 318 mics used on that day, and more than 100 megahertz of spectrum. You can see here from the screenshot of the Shure wireless workbench, there are like these thin white lines, and every white line here represents a 200 kilohertz channel for a wireless microphone device. So you can see how congested the spectrum is. And let me tell you that in the UAE, there's no broadcasting channels. There's virtually no TV channels. So it was all occupied by PMSE here. And over than 1,000 frequencies were used daily to cover different events. So what exactly are PMSE needs? Now, the way that audio PMSE is very dynamic and really related to the size of the event that's being hosted there. So typically around 40 to 80 wireless microphones plus in-ear monitoring systems are used on a daily basis to cover news, production, content creation. And European studies have showed that around 96 megahertz are sufficiently for daily use. Another report by the Swiss Radio and Television basically divided the event size into small, medium, and large, and accordingly concluded with the spectrum needs, like 42 megahertz for small events, 115 for medium, and sometimes exceeding 174 megahertz for large events. And it is important that the spectrum is made available for PMSE for content creation. Now, why the UHF band? And why not just let the PMSE guys just go and take some other parts of the spectrum? Well, mainly because of its physical characteristics. Due to the fact that the PMSE equipment, it's very close to the body. I think all the panelists and speakers today experienced a similar situation of having this mic very close and transmitter very close to their bodies, and they're moving around. So the UHF has this great physical characteristic that allows for low body absorption and favorable propagation. Moreover, it allows for interference-free operation, and we're sharing the band with the broadcasters for more than 60 years, and that they have predictable behavior, which allows for our seamless transmission operation. Moreover, at APWPT, we've been working with the closely around regulatory proceedings, such as in Agenda Item 1.5, and making sure that we have sufficient spectrum for PMSE to enable content creation. So just a couple of summary points. PMSE is essential for the economy and the culture of a country, and it is important to enable content creation for PMSE. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Nada. Next, we have Joe Franz from Broadcast Networks Europe to give us the broadcast perspective.
Right. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. Thank you for inviting us to be part of this discussion. I think, we can agree, most of us in here, that we as Africans need to look for our own unique situations. And I agree, it's about affordability, it's about accessibility, and all those things. But let me begin by first bringing you greetings from broadcasters from across the continent of Africa, and there are many of them. Let me bring you also greetings from Broadcast Networks Europe. And for those of you who don't know, Broadcast Network Europe represents Europe's terrestrial network operators who are responsible for managing terrestrial networks, operating them, and maintaining the infrastructure that brings you compelling TV, attractive radio, and other wireless and over-the-air services to homes, cars, and other users. As you know, there is considerable opposition to the co-primary allocation of the sub-700 band in the broadcasting industry. And of course, this is not a surprise. And that's why the African Union of Broadcasting has adopted a declaration based on the principles of equality, equitability, accessibility, and affordability, which calls for the protection of the spectrum used in digital TV at the next WRC next year. We also have some concerns about sovereignty issues. We have concerns about security issues, national disaster recovery issues, national redundancy issues, and those are concerns that we hold. In fact, we are deeply worried because of the negative impact co-primary allocation may have on DTT broadcasting. We believe that a stable regulatory framework is essential for African broadcasters and the whole audio-visual and events ecosystem as a whole. Let me share with you 3 reasons why we believe that a no change of the current allocation of the sub-700 band is the best way forward. One, the band is the only harmonized spectrum for TV broadcasting throughout the 3 ITU regions. And for those of you who say that Americas have cleared that particular part of the spectrum, it might be good to know that the Americas have ensured that there is exactly the same amount of spectrum reserved for broadcasting elsewhere in that spectrum space. Number two, further allocation to mobile with IMT identification in part of the band would imply considerable replanning, and in fact, I submit, would constitute a conflict with the GEO6 agreement. And three, the benefits of a change to co-primary status of the band in Region 1 is not demonstrated. In fact, co-primary allocation would lead to mutually assured destruction, as the mobile industry and the DTTB systems will interfere with each other, even when separated by hundreds of kilometers, as shown by current TG61 studies. And obviously, if you agree with your neighbors and can agree with your neighboring countries, there's nothing that hampers you from going forward. But we submit that such usage sterilizes large geographical areas where neither systems can be operated. We believe that while spectrum is a scarce natural resource, in Africa, there will still be ample spectrum for all users without changing the allocation of the band. In fact, in most of Africa, the spectrum allocated to IMT is unused, and most of you have heard this as we been here this week. According to the ITU itself, in rural Africa, 20% of the population is not even covered by 2G, and 78% are not covered by mobile services in the 700 or 800 bands in most of Africa. So what we're just saying is that use what has been allocated before you ask for more. Use what has been assigned before you ask for more. And I think that is fair to say that. Obviously, at the same time, we know that majority of countries in the region require at least 224 megahertz for broadcasting, as was submitted in the ITU questionnaire, which represents less than 2% of comparable and available bandwidth for mobile. And really, what difference would 2% more spectrum make to the mobile industry in that space? Those are the reasons why it is vital to protect the only remaining band for terrestrial broadcasting. And I'm not saying broadcasting should not evolve. I'm not saying broadcasting will not improve the way it works. It did. Compression algorithms and all that has been done before, and we've been part of evolved and been innovative, and will continue to do so. But I think we also know that majority of countries in Region 1 have made very, very heavy investments, quite considerable investments, and are still using the band for broadcasting. And I think that capital destruction to nation states will not be easily taken. Without the sub-700 band, beyond 2030, the African and European broadcasting industry can no longer operate, it can no longer innovate, and it can no longer compete. And all what we are saying is that please do not let one industry kill the other. We may evolve, we may converge, and in fact, we will evolve and we will find ways of reaching mobile and new radio and all that. But these are two industries whose needs are equally needed. In conclusion, we believe that maximizing the public value of UHF band in Africa in Region 1 means ensuring continued delivery of broadcasting services in the 470 to 694 megahertz bands, which also allows PMSE. And for those of you, you go to church, you go to concerts, you go to football stadiums, they all use the spectrum space we're talking about in PMSE. And I think the consumers and our citizenry will not take it lightly. there is a considerable downside to a co-primary allocation and the risk for losing the only means of low-cost, easy-to-use, widespread, environmentally friendly TV distribution to large populations. It will also become a significant problem to manage if large audiences eventually use their simple-to-use, simple-to-receive, low-cost TV. So, ladies and gentlemen, the key to balance is balancing the needs of all key users. The key is making sure that all industries are taken care of and that there is stability in the regulatory systems that goes beyond 5 years, 10 years. That's all we're asking for. The key is balancing the needs of all key users. Finally, let me say that the African Union of Broadcasters, together with the European Broadcasting Union and BNE, has published a white paper which spells out the economic reasons, the political reasons, but also the legal reasons, and above all, the environmental reasons, not least, why it is necessary to keep the band for broadcasting. And we'll be happy to share with you, and it's on the website. So with that, I think we'll have to leave room for lots of discussion, engaging discussions, and we represent industry, and we're here to find solutions to move forward. And let's us move forward together. Let's find ways and means of working together and coming up with a common African position. But let's do it so that all of us can be happy as we move on from here. So keep the band for broadcasting. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great. Thank you very much, Joe. And our final speaker today is Berta Semke from MTN Group to give us the mobile perspective with our thanks for stepping in at relatively short notice to fill this slot.
Thank you very much.
Bertus.
Afternoon, everybody. Happy to announce that I'm not going to bore you with any slides. So to get this over and done with, I think we avoiding the crucial issue here, the elephant in the room, so to say. And it is the undeniable trend in terms of terrestrial TV viewing, and the undeniable fact that it's heading in one direction only, that being down. The reality is that not only do we find that people are changing the technology, how they are viewing, they're changing their entire behavior. Brunel actually stole my term, our term, but it's all about instant gratification. It's about short form videos. I don't have any terrestrial or even satellite TV subscription. When I have time, I'll stream something. And it's not only a developed market or a developed user type of scenario. That is where the entire viewing experience is heading towards. We recently went through the migration from analog over to digital in South Africa. And from the early days, the government and the regulator was looking at ensuring the capability of viewing for those that still had analog box-type TV sets. And there was a bespoke set-top box developed, a lot of efforts to ensure local manufacturing. And now it's the process of supplying the users, the viewers, with these set-top boxes so that they can still, on the old analog receivers, receive the new digital signal down mixed for analog. The reality is the take-up is poor. Probably not even 20 or 30% of the expected applications for these set-top boxes are coming in. Why? Because the barriers to entry and the ease and simplicity of getting a satellite dish with all of your free-to-air channels on an extremely cheap free-to-air box is undeniable. It's almost more effort to go to your post office and apply for your digital to analog converter to continue viewing as you are at the moment. Now, if you balance that with the desire or the demand with the actual supply in terms of the amount of programming that's available, you see it's the same picture developing. The GSMA had a presentation at Mobile World Conference in Kigali last week, where they looked at the possibility of taking the current multiplexers and stacking them as far low down as possible. And I was able to overlay the quite vast sample that they had there with some of the markets that we're operational in. And it's evident that markets such as Ghana, Nigeria, Uganda, South Africa, Rwanda, Cameroon, Ivory Coast, with the amount of multiplexers stacked efficiently and optimized, the 600 megahertz band can already be made available. Now, the counter argument is that now what we're doing DTT, because it vastly opens up the space for additional broadcasters and additional multiplexers. As Runel said, where are these guys? Countries have made the transition over to digital. These guys are not knocking down your door. They're not making new programming. They're not coming up with hordes of new channels that need to be accommodated with multiplexers. So in terms of maximizing that band, I think we need to respect both industries, but we also need to look at bang for buck. You cannot reserve vast spectrum for a service which might have appealed to people over decades, but does no longer enjoy the same type of support in both the demand and the supply of new programming. We've spoken about the situation about 2G, 3G sunsetting, and I think this is very important once again, if you look at maximizing the value of sub-1 GHz. We cannot position ourselves to extract maximum value of sub-1 GHz spectrum if we have legacy 2G, 3G dumb handsets on our networks, essentially gobbling up most of the 900 megahertz and leaving us with having to dig lower and lower. But this is a multidisciplinary approach. There needs to be participation from various ministries in countries to make sure that we increase the barriers to entry of these very, very cheap handsets that are horribly spectrally inefficient. In South Africa, the minister announced a hard cutoff date for import banning of legacy 3G and 2G handsets, and also a similar date when the functionality needs to be switched off on our networks. We need to look at a mechanism to decrease the appeal of these legacy handsets, but we need to balance that. We need to also say, similarly, we'll agree on a price, what do you call it, $40 or $50, under which amount we do not tax via import, excise, ad valorem duties, 4G, 5G handsets to come into our markets. I'm not talking about abolishing the import tax on an iPhone 14. That's very much still a luxury item. But recognize the fact that we cannot expect people to make the transition from 3G to 4G unless we lower the barriers to entry. One of the intrinsic problems that we've experienced, and I'm sure most African markets that made that transition, was the lack of synergy between broadcasters and mobile network operators. You can't deny the fact that it is expensive to move frequencies across the country. But there's many case studies that showed the possibility to recover or to fund the exercise of moving broadcasting frequencies and to net that money from selling licenses to mobile operators. In any event, the move further down the spectrum bands at the moment is no longer that fundamental step change going from analog to digital. It's an incremental move downward. And then lastly, in motivation for continuously growing traffic in the lower frequency bands. When 5G, I remember when 5G, it actually came around by 4G already, but I think it's very much part of the narrative for 5G now, is the idea that a large percentage, if not the majority in the years to come, of the users that we have on 5G will be non-human. And we call it that. We call them IoT M2M. Yet we still operate in a regulatory framework where we're pursuing population coverage. That's not how you build an ecosystem of connected devices, intelligent IoT connected entities, if you only cover your population. But in order to do complete geographical coverage, you need to dig deep in terms of your spectrum resources. Yes, we know that many of these sensors machine automation and automated manufacturing might ultimately take small slithers of bandwidth, but collectively they compound into a formidable requirement for data that cannot just be covered with 700 and 800 megahertz. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bertus. Fantastic. I certainly have a few questions I can ask the panel based on a very interesting set of presentations. I'm sure there's also a lot of questions in the audience, so I don't want to distract from those for too long. So I'll just try and be brief here. Scott, you had some really interesting figures there, and I think they highlighted quite well the bottleneck around sub-1 gigahertz spectrum. So I think you said about 7% of capacity comes on mobile networks, typically comes from sub-1 gigahertz spectrum, but there's around 10 to 20% of the traffic, in my experience, probably towards the higher end of that range. So I guess the question is here, to what extent does the 600 megahertz band solve that problem? And I think maybe, Bertus, you alluded to it as well, that there's a kind of multifaceted approach that's needed. But yeah, I'm just wondering whether, 600 megahertz, which is potentially, at least as Joe has framed it, sort of an existential issue for broadcast, versus the fact that it's contributing to solving a problem, but not necessarily solving it for mobile. There's a sort of dichotomy there that we need to think about. I don't know what your views are on.
Well, I mean, I think you're right that it's not going to solve it forever, and other spectrum bands will be required, and we'll have to densify networks also. So it doesn't solve it completely, but they are going to hit a spectrum crunch, and that's very clear. That was made clear to us in all the interviews we conducted with the operators who were involved in this project. So,
yeah. That makes sense. Does anybody else want to come in on that before I ask one final question? Okay. So I guess the question I have on the broadcast and PMSE side is then around the level of variation in demand between countries and for the African region as a whole compared to, say, Europe and the Middle East. So, I mean, I think Ronel has sort of highlighted that in Namibia, for example, the broadcast spectrum is relatively underutilized, and in fact, carving out the 600 megahertz band would probably leave sufficient broadcast spectrum in Namibia, but clearly that's, well, I think in your view anyway, would be that clearly that's not the case in all countries. So, I mean, how do you sort of see the split? Do you feel like there's a lot of countries? You mentioned, I think, 95 across region 1, Joe, but I'm not sure how many of those were in Africa.
Well, I mean, certainly there are different realities in different countries. But first of all, let me say that the rumor of linear TV's death is highly exaggerated. And I think that it's also important to ensure that we need to respect both industries. This broadcasting industry, if you have a small garden in your backyard, you need to water and nurture and make sure every part of the garden is properly watered. Now, to your question, I think the reality is that different countries have different realities. And what I would say is that there is the GEO6 agreement. And what we are asking for is a long-term stability and a regulatory environment. So I'm not saying that forever and ever there should not be no change. What I'm saying is that let us have a more steady, a more stable, a more gradual, and a more a movement that we can perceive and relate to. So I agree. I mean, Namibia may have a different issue. Nigeria, certainly with its critical mass and with its, may have another, but quite rightly, majority of African countries, absolute majority, have responded in the questionnaire that they need that band. So, I think we should respect that. But I think we should also do not think that it's a static situation where TV would not evolve. TV will evolve. And certainly at some point in stage, there will definitely be broadcasting reaching mobile. There will definitely be new radio. So let us see this as creating the room and space for all our citizens more than 50% of our citizens don't have the money to buy cell phones. They cannot buy data. And we are talking of free-to-air TV. So let's look at that. These are different realities.
Bertus?
I do agree that it is necessary to nurture and look at both industries. But I think we need to guard against the situation that we're effectively just kicking the can down the road, because then you're not solving the situation. And I want to maybe just bring it back to the point that was raised, that use before you ask for more, that we should not start working on additional spectrum bands until we sufficiently prove that we've run out. And I think some industries have become so used to asking that question, they don't take one step back and actually just reframe it. If you look at that mindset, transport that mindset into something like urban planning. If you're planning a new suburb, you identify a piece of land, you go through environmental impact studies to see if you can classify it as a suburb. You then do the necessary legal aspects to make sure that it's acceptable, that it gets classified. Then that land gets cleared from whether it's vegetation or a factory or whatever. And then only you actually start zoning for stands. You put in municipal services, water, electricity, sewage, or whatever. Then people buy these stands. A new owner goes and he submits plans, he builds his house, and eventually you've got a happy family living there. So it's a protracted period from when an area was identified for suburban development until we eventually have a family in it. So to superimpose the use it before you ask for more is essentially like saying we're not going to identify any further suburbs for residential development until there's a house with a family on every single lot that was already identified. You'll suffocate the city if you do that, and no urban planner that's worth his salt will ever look at this. You need to layer these things. Similarly, when it comes to the mobile industry, we need to now have these discussions for spectrum that we want available in 8 or 12 years from now. And if we postpone these discussions, then the eventual availability moves out correspondingly.
Yes, and that's exactly the reason why we're saying that let broadcasting have that spectrum so we can also plan and develop and evolve and innovate and be part of a competition in the future. I think the analogy that you have a lot of space, the fact that in the rural areas they don't have even 2G, it's not because that there's no spectrum, it's because there's no infrastructure. And so my analogy is that build the infrastructure, let the people have them, create cheap data, let people use it. But really, my point is that we also need that space to develop and evolve and operate in the same way that you need to plan. We need that also to plan. So give us the space, give us the room, and I'm really confident that as we go ahead, we will evolve together and we will converge and we will, but let's don't do that at the expense of each other.
Yeah, makes sense. So we have around 10 minutes left in this session, so I'm going to open the up to audience questions. At this point, we have one at the front here to kick us off. Again, name and affiliation to begin with would be great, please.
Bashir Gwandu, CIG, Commonwealth RTU Group, and the former Nigerian regulator. Now, first point of clarification, Scott, I think I saw 150 meg of 1,000 megahertz, and I don't know whether my addition is wrong, but are you really, is it going to be up to 150 or 130? I want some clarity on that, because I have 35 on the 930, on the 830, on the 735, on the 600, making 100 and
there's also the SDL.
Huh?
There's also SDL
okay,
spectrum
okay.
as
You
well.
added the FDL. Okay, that makes it clearer. Thank you. Good. Having cleared that, I think it's important to point out that when we did the 800 megahertz in 2007, we had the same kind of approach that we're hearing today. We have really good operators from broadcasting community that made this kind of case, strong case for it. But and 2007, we also had a lot of challenges on getting the 700 megahertz allocation, 2012 rather, 700 megahertz allocation. And in 2015, when, like I said in my probably previous intervention, Africa Union saw this coming and the commissioned a report on harmonization, which we worked on. And we actually anticipated that we will need this 35 by 35, even at that time, 2015. This is like, how many years ago? 8 years? 7, 8 years ago that we did that. And now it's clear to me that we can foresee this happening even then. If we still today say that this is not coming, I think it will be proper to make that conclusion. So therefore, that takes me to Ronel's points that even after all these difficulties, we still don't have that many operators of the DTT populating the bands. That's just a fact of today. And as regulators, the priority is, like Ronel mentioned, how do you make this use of these scarce resources to benefit the people? It's not, regulators' work is like a judge. You can't just say, because of something, you keep something for 10 years or 20 years. No, you have to make decisions that help the people as soon as practical. And these decisions that we make today are not going to be like switch. That once you make the decision, they get implemented. There is time for standardization. There is time for so many other plans that will come up. We took a decision not to discuss this band against 2019 conference. That's the whole idea, is to allow people to plan. Now we come 2023. It's on the table. Therefore, I think everybody in the industry can see this coming. It's necessary, and the reality on the ground is that not many people are using this band for DTT. That's the reality on the ground. Therefore, our responsibility as regulators is to look at the possibility of maximizing the benefit to the people. Now, that takes me also to another point, which is the channeling. I think what I have from the UHF is channel 21 all the way to channel 48. What happened to the other channels below? They're in the VHF, so they're still there. You know, they're not that it's only, like mentioned, it's only thing available. They're there, but at least there's something inefficient out there for those who want to continue to maintain inefficiency. But, you know, the fact remains that we are not saying that take the whole channels. No, a part from channel 39 to 48 only. Only the top part, 9 channels or so. Okay. That's what is in discussion. Channel 21 to channel 37 are still to be used for VHF. UHF, they should be used as UHF band for broadcast. That's the proposal that was presented for the harmonized spectrum of the African report. Now, having said that,
sorry, thank you for the question. Have you got a question to conclude with?
All right.
Or can we let Joe respond?
Yeah, I think the question is quite clear.
Then one more thing that I must quickly, in conclusion, say is that, like the MTN gentleman mentioned, we can't wait for the spectrum to run out. It's our role as regulators to see ahead and plan. We have seen Tanzania, we have seen Nigeria. Many countries have bigger populations, therefore we must plan. That's why we're sitting here. Also, we see that ITU. It's important to plan well ahead. Yeah. And that I think we shouldn't lose sight of. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we appreciate the sentiment that planning ahead is important and that there will be demand from mobile. I think the question, though, is around the fact that there's also demand from DTT, right? So, Joe, sorry, I'll let you.
I'd like to say something, but let Ronel, because she's not spoken. She's not. I'll come back after that.
Yeah.
I think, sorry, Mark, I just hear the sprint hand there right at the back that maybe would like to have a question. Before I give you, I just want to say, remember, this is not the only broadcasting technologies. We've also already started looking at 5G broadcast.
Correct.
for the future. It is a matter of technical evolution and how we adapt to it from our side.
No, I agree with that. I think that, we need to think about that. But I also think that, with Bashir's issue, it's like cooking the frog. You cook the frog slowly, and by the time you realize it's cooked. And we were able to do the two previous takeaways because of the compression technology, because of new algorithms, because of all that. And we are prepared to do that even in the future. But I think we also need to have space to evolve. We also need to be able to discuss this hybrid situations and all that. So it's very simple. I'm not saying that you should let the spectrum be fallow.
No.
We all accept that fact.
Understood. And Nada from the PMSE side?
Yeah. I just have a comment on, residing to other bands or lower bands like VHF. The thing is that sometimes you're bound by the physical characteristics and by the technical really abilities of the audio devices. So there might be like VHF audio PMSE products that are working in the VHF band, but they're of extremely low quality that you cannot really utilize in important events. Moreover, you have technical issues like battery size, antenna size, propagation that you need to pay attention to when using the lower bands. This is why the UHF is critical for audio PMSE due to its physical advantages.
Thank you. Should we take that question at the back, please, Anna?
Yeah, thank you very much, and afternoon. My question is directed to Ms. Lekranji. I think let me start by making this particular statement. We are glad as South Africa to see that there are countries in Africa that shares our sentiments that 2G doesn't really meet the requirements of broadband as per our definitions in our SA Connect, which is our broadband policy. Now, what I'm interested to know from Namibia's point of view, how do you deal with your security companies, your banking sectors, who are using machine-to-machine or IoT services, especially from let me say, financial services for their banking, and also the view that the licensing of spectrum is on a technology neutrality basis, and it should be a decision to switch off your 2G or 3G must be left to commercial decision making. Thank you.
Renelle?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Sono. In the case of Namibia, the largest operator has also already indicated its plan, its own business decision, also to switch off 2G. They are no longer rolling out 2G sites. They're only rolling out 3G and upwards and refarming the spectrum in the 900 megahertz to 4G. In terms of the banking sector, applications in the banking sector in part, and we had the regulatory sandbox only last week with the FinTech Center and the banking regulator, are still looking at USSD, purely for the simple matter that lack of connectivity to broadband, to make full use of the mobile banking apps that is being provided by these banks, are forcing them to make use of technologies like USSD, because your broadband network has not reached, 4G has not reached the farming community. And that is where our core function is now as regulator, is to make sure that 4G, as a minimum, reach those communities. Also because we are busy with digital transformation, industrialization of the country. We would like to see the high-end e-applications Our 5G is about to be released, pending a cabinet decision on the strategy. And we made it very clear, it's more about than just broadband. You must have a use case on top of broadband to roll out 5G. And for that, we also allow dynamic spectrum sharing between the two technologies, but it's not backwards compatible with 2G and 3G. As such, we would like to see that 2G goes by the wayside. It's similar than WiMAX. We would like to see WiMAX removed because it's an old technology. There are better fixed broadband wireless access technologies at present. Technology evolves. Next year, this time, we're going to discuss 5G broadcast, not DTT. We're going to move forward, and the world will move with us. Our population will move with us on digital literacy and the need to have equality in the whole country in terms of access to services. Thank you.
Thanks, Ronald. For context, the UK is aiming to switch off 2G by 2033, but it's unclear yet if we'll get there. I think we're more or less out of time, but I've been granted one last question from the audience. I saw Alexander's hand shooting up quite forcefully last time, so I'll take that one with apologies to anyone else who doesn't get to ask a question.
Thank you very much. Alexander Kuhn from the German Regulatory Authority. It's quite an interesting debate which shows exactly what it's all about on 1.5 or how the discussions are driven forward. From my understanding regarding the broadcasting position from BNE, it seems to me that we have here a similar situation like the discussion if anyone would like to have IMT in the bands. I have my exclusive right, and I would like to share the band only with the secondary service of PMSE, and I do not want to get anybody else on board. The question here is, from my understanding, and that is also some kind of German position here, that we need to have a cooperative approach because the band is not fully effectively used in all the countries. That is a question of Geneva 6 in total and its application. So it's a border coordination issue, and we need to take this into account. From my understanding, and also we heard this from many of the speakers here as well, is that the broadcasting use has been developed throughout after the digital dividend 1 and 2, so 800 and 700 as well. They flourished. We have more channels on air like ever before. We have more PMSE links on air like ever before, and there is still room. So what are we doing with the remaining room? If people or if countries have a different approach or a different demand for the use of spectrum, in particular in rural areas, we need to provide a solution for that one. And the international scene is the exact point and forum where we have to discuss it and not discuss the national use of it. That's the national decision. And I'm quite thankful to Ronald from the media to point it out very clearly what they would like to achieve with sub-1 GHz bands. I can only say that in Germany and in Europe, we have a difficulty with the switch off of 2G. We switched off already 3G, but 2G switch off is tricky to the use of some of particular technology. So I cannot provide any answer on any year on that specific point. But thank you very much for letting me giving that particular comment. And it would be interesting to see maybe any result or any reaction from the floor. Thank you.
May I just say that GO6 already provides for this discussion. So, you know, I think that if we stick to that, countries and neighboring countries, if they can agree, fine. So that would be my response.
Thank you very much. Does anyone else want to add anything or any final words more generally before we close, as I think we're already late for our coffee break? Nope. Okay, well, in that case, I hope you'll join me in thanking our panelists for an excellent session. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you, Betty.
So yeah, thank you to our panelists, and thank you, Mark, as well, for moderating that and introducing things so well. So now we're going to another coffee break. The recurring theme, we're still running a little bit late, so if we could ask everyone to keep it to around about 15 minutes or so, and to try and be back in here for around about 5 to. That would be great. Thanks, everyone, and we'll be back shortly.